Hi, my name is Rebecca Lexo. I'm doing Photography 154, Project 3. The photographer that I've chosen is Tina Modotti. She's an Italian-born modernist photographer. She also kind of dabbled in social documentary photography and the avant-garde movement in Mexico in the 1920s. Tina Modotti was working in and around Mexico City. She photographed the people and the political climate post-revolution and became a part of the Communist Party there also. Her photos emanate her creative, artistic take on activism in the 1920s. Tina Modotti's photos are known for their framing, shadow, and light usage, and view into everyday life in Mexico City. Modotti's photos are known for framing, shadow, and light. She uniquely used those to show a lot of texture and depth that has really stood out throughout photographic history. She was born in 1890 to middle-class Italian parents and moved shortly with her dad to San Francisco in 1913. She worked as a model and later as an actress. She actually married motion picture director Ruby Ritchie, who ended up dying of smallpox in 1922 during her affair that she had with Edward Weston. Edward Weston was a very prominent photographer, and he taught her a lot about photography, and she ended up moving with him to Mexico City in 1920 and took a slightly different variation in her photography off of what Western had previously taught her, and eventually gave up photography so that she could become a communist activist full-time. But she actually ended up coming back to Mexico City not too long after that, where she passed away. And fun fact, her death is actually very controversial because it was reported as cardiac arrest officially, but a lot of people think she was actually murdered in the back of a taxi by Russian communists. Her photographic career was started by Edward Weston, who trained her a lot in techniques and framing and the modernist aesthetic photographic work. She, however, quickly branched out with her own style and variations on his technique. Mexico was in the middle of the avant-garde movement. Her photographs were featured in a lot of publications in the area, and she focused a lot on political, social, and folk art themes in her photography, and she's known for her skillful use of composition and shadows. This first photo of the calla lily is really beautiful because of its composition. It's cut at the stem, so we see just the head and the petal and the spiral in the center, and the image is very focused, right on center, very close up. Weston wanted his photos to be more artistic, and he focused more on photographing the mural art in Mexico City, and Tina took a different step. As you can see, she photographed more people, and this one of a baby nursing I think is really interesting because it's actually very close up. Technology at the time, Modotti would have to be sitting very close to the mom and the baby. So this is a very intimate photo, and it's so close up that we can see detail. We can see the baby's eyelashes, we can see her earrings, her little fingernails. This close-up of a workman's hands is also very representative of the modernist photography movement. The hands are right on center. They're almost the only thing in the photo. They're holding the handle of what looks like a shovel or something that's very old and kind of rusty. The hands themselves are very dry and dirty, and this photo also crops out the face and identity of the person who the hands belong to. And the Museum of Modern Art actually calls this photo, quote, a quiet celebration of laborers' dignity. This photo is an aesthetic arrangement. The sickle is said to be representative of communism. However, I'm not sure. The corn and the bullets are also just essentials for daily living in Mexico City. It's dried out, and we can even see glint on all of those individual bullets. The vantage point of this one is actually very interesting, as well as the composition, because we can see that Tina's vantage point is kind of up and above the crowds. And I think it's interesting that she's behind all of them instead of facing them. So we see mainly a lot of backs of heads. We don't actually get to see what's happening in the field, so it's a very interesting crop where she's chosen this angle to give us, where we're mainly focusing on the people and not what's actually going on, which I think is right in line with her shift of focus into being more interested in the lives and goings-on of these people in Mexico City. And Tina Modotti were actually pretty good friends in Mexico City. I think this photo is very interesting because it's not the usual Frida that we see represented a lot of the time. The unibrow isn't very prominent. We don't see a flower crown or anything, or a flouncy dress or any of that. It's human, and it's very humble for someone who is so famous now. This boy in front of a cactus is posed. It looks like she posed him in front of this huge cactus. He's looking straight at the camera. They're right in the center of the photo. She left some of the ground in there around him, and then there's also a lot around him on top of the cactus, which makes him look really small within the frame. I think this is where she began to branch off from Weston's work into more personal photography. This girl carrying a water pitcher also has a very straightforward modern look to it, of the modernist aesthetic in everyday life. This girl is in the middle of chores, it looks like, and she's looking right past the camera. And again, we have a whole body portrait emphasizing how small she is. The shadows in the background play with the depth of texture in the fabric. We see a lot of contrast between the light and dark here, of the darkness deepening behind her in the background, but the light shows off her apron and her wrap that she's wearing. This photo is just titled Misery, which I think is a very interesting title. I couldn't really find a backstory for this one, but it seems like it's a very unsettling picture because we can't really tell if the person laying down is dead or injured. And we can also see people in the far right corner standing with their backs to these people, which means they're not very interested in what's going on. So for Tina Modotti, it really portrays accurately the misery of the everyday people. This photo of a woman with a flag is a very stunning profile view. Her chin is up, her gaze is straight ahead, and the flag fabric contours out behind her. There's not a lot going on. It's just the subject and the background and whatever props they are using. Editor and author of El Machete newspaper. His name is Julio Antonio Mela. He was a Cuban activist in the Communist Party with Modotti. He was murdered while walking home with her on the street. Profile view, he looks very handsome. His jawbone stands out, and he's looking off into the distance, frowning slightly. This typewriter actually belonged to Julio Mela, who was in the previous photo. The composition is very interesting because we don't see the whole typewriter. We can tell that this typewriter is used often. This is the typewriter that Mela used when he edited and wrote for El Machete, and it really became an emblem of Tina Modotti's own communist sympathies. This photo of the woman with the baskets it really shows how Modotti is able to balance romanticism and activism in her photos in Mexico City. It's a relatively clean shot. The camera's pointed at the house's front door, and it's capturing the everyday activities of the people inside. This photo is of some middle-class workers reading El Machete, which is the newspaper that Julio Mela published and edited. Actually, if you translate the headline there into English, it says, "No peace in all the earth." I think the sombreros are very interesting as well because we don't really see anyone's face here. We can see a few noses, but the focus of this photo is not on the faces. It's very clearly the Communist magazine, and then all of these anonymous working class people. Sarah Lowe, quote, "This photo is a reminder that the revolution's promise of universal literacy would only be fulfilled by the activism of the people," end quote. Frida Kahlo up front, and next to her on our left is her husband, Diego Rivera. He was a very prominent painter in the Mexican mural movement, which was going on right around when Modotti and Weston were in Mexico. One of his paintings actually shows Tina handing out ammunition to Julio Mela, her lover. So all four of these people were very close to each other. They were friends. They were all in the same political group. They had very similar ideologies. So this photo that Tina took during this day march for the Artists Union is mostly full of her friends and people that were very dear to her and shared a lot of the same ideas that she had. She gave up her camera about 2 years after this photo was taken to be able to devote herself fully to activism. Tina Modotti's significance to the history of photography is quite huge. She was an Italian-born woman who managed to have a very significant contribution to the Mexican Renaissance and avant-garde movements in the 1920s. She was viewed for a long time as Edward Weston's muse, but was able to come out from under his shadow. Her work is relevant not only to photography, but also to activism as well. She really reimagined what it looked like to document the people's experience.